Today's daf we're going to be learning is Ketubot daf Yubet. Today's daf is sponsored by Judith Weil in loving memory of Adina Hashesh's beloved mother-in-law, Keti Kamuna Peretz Hashesh, who passed away yesterday on the 18th of Tammuz. May Adina and Eric know no more sorrow. Okay, we're a few quick announcements. Number one, the bookmark orders are open. You have till Wednesday to order your bookmarks, so get in your orders quickly. If you didn't yet order our Nashim bookmarks, those who already ordered through Yevamot, it's the same thing. You don't need to order again. But if you're new to the daf, you haven't yet ordered, please order. They're free, and we'll send them to you. Second thing, I want to just remind you that I'll be the daf will continue as normal over the summer, but not on Zoom. Okay, starting next Sunday already, there will not be Zoom for about a month till around the 25th of August. So stay tuned on the Zoom WhatsApp group. If you're not on it, you can go to our website to find out how to join. And that's that. Okay. So if we're going to start, we have a great, really another one of these interesting dafim. These are the reasons why this daf is considered shas katan, because we're going to see all sorts of interesting issues that come up, particularly toward the end of the daf, very, very basic sugyot about how we determine different contradictory claims. One person says what, one person says something else, one person says one thing, one person says something else. How do we know who to believe? Upon what principles do we operate? And that's going to kind of be the intro to a whole bunch of mishnayot that are talking about different claims that are made and how we resolve, who's telling the truth and who's not. Actually, will take us for a while. This topic really, really fascinating. Okay, Tanu Rabban. We're going to start from the beginning of Yud Aleph Amud Bet at the bottom, quoting a braita. If you remember, let's just go back to the Mishnah for a minute. The Mishnah at the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph said, if you have a almana grusha v'chalutza min hanisuin, you have a woman who was married but never had relations, she's still a virgin. Ketubatan maneh. Their ketuba is worth only 100, even though they're virgins, but they were already married. So this is and ein lahem tana betuli. And the husband can't go claim, well, I thought she was a betula, and therefore what? I mean, a non-betula gets 100. Well, in this case, he wants to claim she lied to me. She's really not a virgin, and theoretically, he would want to say mekach ta'ud. I married her thinking she was one thing. Turns out she wasn't, and I don't want to give her anything. But he can't do that. Why can't he do that? Because it's something that he should have known that it was a possibility anyway. Okay? In a normal case, you don't really think about it. She says, I'm a betula. You figure she's telling the truth. But in a case where she was already married to someone, even though she claims she's a betula, seems like there's at least a good, possible chance that she's not. So therefore, you should have known going in, and therefore you can't claim, oh, she duped me. Because, if you're duped by someone who duped you in a way that you should have really considered all the possibilities and you didn't, that's not considered being duped by her. So now we're going to have a case where all the more so you would think maybe he could claim he was duped and yet he can't. Tanu Rabbanan. The first husband married her, right, for purposes of marriage. He brings her into his house. But there's witnesses. Here we have something further, which is not only were they married and she claims she was a virgin, but there are witnesses that they were never alone in a room together from the time of the marriage till the time of the divorce or his death or something like that. Inami, or alternatively, nistira v'lo shahata kedei bia. They were in a room alone, but not enough to have had relations. Ein hasheni yachol lit'on ta'anat betuli. Still, the second husband can't claim, even though it seems like there's proof that they couldn't have been together and that she was a virgin, he still can't claim it. Sharei k'nasa rishon, because she was actually married. So it's not a claim that we're going to allow you to make. To which Rabba says, Amar Rabba, Zot Omeret, from here one can infer the following. Knasa b'chezka betula v'nimtzeit be'ula yesh la ketuba almaneh. From here you can infer. Forget about an almana, a widow. She was previously married. A regular person, a guy marries a woman. She was never married. She says, I'm a virgin. He finds out she's not. What happens? Instead of the 200 zuz, she drops down to 100. Now, theoretically, you could have thought he could claim, you lied to me. I don't want to be married to you at all. And you don't even get your 100 zuz. You get nothing because you lied to me. So from here, you can infer that's not the case. She still gets her ketuba of 100 zuz, her non-betula ketuba, right? She doesn't get her 200 zuz, but she does get 100 zuz. How do you infer it from here? Because look, our braita right now just said, if he thought she was a virgin and it turns out she wasn't, she still gets the basic, non-virgin ketuba. So we're comparing the cases. It seems pretty similar. No, it's not exactly similar because we already just said here she was actually married, and it even says sharei knasa rishon, and maybe that's the reason. But right now they're saying, but if you look at it, it looks like there's witnesses that she didn't have relations with him, which basically means she's kind of like an unmarried woman who claimed she was a virgin and turned out not to be. So that's what Rabba wants to learn from here. Rabbi Ashi Amal, no. In a regular case, she doesn't get anything because she really did lie to him. In this case is different. Why? Exactly for the reason we said. If he just marries a random woman who was never married before, and she claimed she was a virgin, and it turns out she wasn't, so he had no way of anticipating that she was lying. In this case, since she was already married, he should have anticipated that it's possible she's really not a virgin. Right? There's already something that indicates that way, even though there were witnesses saying no, but still she was married. It somehow puts it in a different context. And that's what Rashi says, you can't compare the cases, and therefore you can't derive from this. Really, this is something we saw wasn't very clear in the Mishnah before. What does it mean, yesh lo tana patulim? Does it mean he could drop her down to 100? Or does it mean she doesn't get anything because she lied to him, right? And this is something that you can see is not so clear. Rabba thinks she gets 100. Rabbi Ashi thinks she gets nothing. Now the Gemara asks, why do we say, right, why are we worried that maybe he has to divorce her and maybe she was with some other man? And that is right here. We have witnesses she wasn't with the first husband, which means either she was with someone before the first marriage, or maybe she was with someone while she was engaged to him. Maybe we should be concerned for that possibility. What we mean is in a case where he betrothed her and married her immediately. Already, this is a bit of a hinting, an allusion to the next Mishnah, where we're going to see that even though we talked about there was Kiddushin, and a year later there was marriage, in most cases, there were clearly different customs, and sometimes people married the women right away. First of all, in general, for a second marriage, it was a shorter Erusin time period. Could be here, he did the Kiddushin and the marriage right away, in which case there was no chance that while she was betrothed to him, this happened. Okay? That's what Rav Shrevi says. This whole thing, from the beginning of this page, from Amar Rabba until Rav Shrevi, was all said on the braita, but some people have this version. There was actually a comment on our Mishnah. So, there were some who said it about our Mishnah. Betula amana grusha chalutza min hanisuin, ktubatam maneh, ve'ein lahem tanat betulim. So some people say this whole discussion happened on our Mishnah. When our Mishnah said, remember what the difference between our Mishnah and the braita is. The braita said even if there were witnesses that said she wasn't with him. Our Mishnah just talked about a woman who was married and claimed she actually never had a relationship with her husband. It's just based on her claim. There's no witnesses. So in our Mishnah, it says, right, a betula, a woman who's a virgin, but is an almanah grusha or chalutza min hanisuin. She was already married. Ketubatan maneh, she gets 100. Ve'ein lem tana betulim, and the husband can't claim, oh, you said you were a virgin, and I'm not giving you anything. Betula min hanisuin hechi mishkachala. What could this be? That's the way we explained it. She had a chuppah, but she never ended up having relations with him. Amar Rabba, here comes in Rabba, we're going to have the exact same sugya, but it's going to be on this. Sot omeret, this seems to teach you. Now here it's a little more comparable. Right? She claims she was a virgin. He says, right, he finds out she wasn't. So she drops down to a maneh. Okay, because that's what happened here. Rabashi Amar lo no, he says in general, she doesn't get anything. In this case, it really was very different because she went into the chuppah. Here we didn't even have witnesses that said, right? We had nothing. Okay, so actually it's less comparable. I made a mistake before. It's less comparable because in that case, at least she had witnesses. Well, the truth is in the Betula case, it was really her word against his. This is also her word against his. Except, so maybe it's a little more similar, but basically, it doesn't matter. They're all really pretty much the same. But here, the main difference is she already was married to him, right? She lived with him. And in this case, specifically, we don't have witnesses at all. So he really should have anticipated that there was a chance. And therefore, he can't start claiming, you made me believe this, when he should have really thought about the possibility. But maybe we should be concerned. She claimed, now when did she make the claim that I'm a betula? Before she was engaged, right? She said, I'm a betula, and that's, and then in the end, she only got 100 anyway for her ketuba, but she claimed that. Maybe though, maybe the be'ilah that she did, maybe she slept with someone after the engagement, which means that she'd be forbidden to him. So that exact same discussion, right? It must be that he betrothed her and slept with her right away. Uman dematne la braita, kol shekena matnitin. Uman dematne la matnitin, aval braita lo. Now they say the following: the person who learned this whole sugya on the braita would all the more so say it was true for the Mishnah, because again, in which case, okay, we're really focusing on Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi distinguishes and says he should have anticipated that maybe she had been with someone, right? And therefore the cases are incomparable. Now, where is it more likely? In our Mishnah, right? So if he says it even in the braita when there's witnesses that said she wasn't with him, he still should have anticipated, then all the more so in the Mishnah, he'll say the same thing. When there weren't witnesses that said she wasn't with him, she was even alone in a room with him for a long time, or who knows, could be something had happened, all the more so he should have anticipated. And in which case he really can't claim Tanat Betuli. And therefore it's not comparable to a different case. But if you said it on the matnitin, but if this whole discussion happened on the Mishnah, and particularly Rav Ashi, who says we distinguish between the cases, it's not like a regular woman who just claims I'm a betula, because then he really thought he should believe her. If that whole discussion was said on our Mishnah, then when it comes to the case in the braita, where there were witnesses who said she was not alone in a room, he could claim maybe Ta'anat Betulim and claim you get nothing because you lied to me because I relied on the witnesses. You have witnesses to support your claim and I relied on them and therefore I really was duped. Okay, in which case, possibly then in that case, right, they would think that that you wouldn't say, Rav Ashi wouldn't be able to make that claim. Basically, you would end up saying what Rabbah tried to say, which is you really could learn from here. She gets a ketuba v'maneh, because if in the braita it says she gets 100, even though she clearly lied to him and duped him. Therefore, in a regular case of being duped, maybe also she would get a maneh, and Rav Ashi would be able to claim, no, in a regular case, you get nothing. Okay, so it depends which one you learn it on. You could come to different conclusions. Now we get to this, which I promised we deal with more in depth, and about this issue of the minhag in Yehuda. We're going to learn some very interesting things about the minhag in Yehuda. Your Hebrew is good. I strongly recommend reading from Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. He has a very long article on this or commentary on this. His commentary is on the Mishnah. If you have Sefaria, you can look it up on the Mishnah and in commentaries on the Mishnah. Just find our Mishnah in the first chapter. I don't remember what number Mishnah is, but it's not too hard to find. And then you can read up about this. And Shuli Mishkan had an article about it as well that went up today about this minhag in Yehuda, and very, very, very interesting. So ha'ochel etzel chamid b'Yehuda, and I'll summarize some of the things that Safrai said, and you can read also, if Hebrew's not good, you can read in flashback also, which summarizes some of the points. So ha'ochel etzel chamid b'Yehuda shelo be'edim. Someone who eats at their father-in-law's house in Judea. You have to remember there were two main areas, Judea and Galilee. Okay, in the Galilee, in the time the Mishnah was put together, most of the rabbis were in the Galilee area. So you have to remember that when they talk about this minhag in Yehuda, they're talking about it from a distance, and you can imagine that they didn't exactly approve of the minhag in Yehuda. Okay, so let's read and then we'll talk about it. So if somebody eats with their father-in-law in Judea, shelo be'edim, meaning he comes to the father-in-law's house, he eats there, and now what does it mean he eats without witnesses? It means he eats there and then ended up in a room alone with his fiancée, without witnesses. Eino yachol lit'on ta'anat betulim. He no longer has a right to claim when he actually marries her that she wasn't a virgin, because he was alone with her in a room, and therefore who knows what happened there? It could be they have relations. So we're starting to learn here that basically, first of all, ha'ochel etzel chamiv is a whole discussion in the commentaries. Is this that there was a big Su'udat Erusin where he would come to the house and eat this big festive meal like an engagement party? And that's what we're talking about. That night they would have yichud. Or is this common that during the time that they're betrothed, he would often come there, and it's not talking about a particular meal. It's just kind of discussing if he were to have done this, and this was common in those days in Judea, people would do this, right? Then already he has no rights to claim Ta'anat Betulim because he already could have been alone, because he was alone in a room with her, something could have transpired. So now they say, Mitikatani ha'ochel, Michla, because it says one who eats at his father-in-law's house in Judea, Michla, from here you can infer, can already see the agenda of the Gemara. They want to tell you, don't think everybody was doing this. You can infer from the Mishnah that it was only those who did this, because it says one who eats by his father, he won't have a Ta'anat Betulim. But it's not everybody. Not everybody in Judea did that, because they kind of want to say, right, we don't exactly approve of this custom, and we don't know why people are doing this. So, they're saying, just know it wasn't to everybody. And Amar Abaye also says, Shma mina b'Yehuda nami mekomot. Yes, it was clear there were different customs in Judea, as it says in the following braita, which is actually a Tosefta, Kedetanya, as it says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, I just want to point out that Safrai claims that this braita was written in the Gamliel, and it's kind of pointing a finger, like saying, we don't do this kind of thing, okay? Kind of saying, this is what goes on there, but no way would this happen by us. So, and you'll see it from the language. In Yehuda, in the beginning, originally, they would bring them together in a room alone, 1 hour before they went into the chuppah, another just a short time before, because they wanted her to be beloved to him. They wanted to develop the relationship, right? If you think of the shidduch world, right, where a couple meets once or twice, barely knows each other, goes to the chuppah, they wanted before the chuppah for them to have a certain familiarity with each other. But in the Gamliel, no, they wouldn't do this. Okay, here you have the Galilean saying, no way, no how. So first of all, this libo gaspa comes up in the Yerushalmi in a bit of a different context. In the Yerushalmi, it was discussed as if there was a shat hashmad. Okay, there was a time where there was something going on with the enemy. Okay, so it appears there about this hegemon, that there was a ruler who would sleep with the women. We saw this before, right? He would sleep with the women on the night of their wedding. So possibly they wanted them to do yichud before, so that it was at least a possibility that maybe she wasn't a betula anymore, and maybe he wouldn't want to do this. Okay, but then he claims it's a little problematic because Safrai claims that even after the Shmad, they still continued this custom, which is interesting. Often things develop and then the reason is no longer there, but yet the custom continues. So that's just interesting in and of itself. Whether that's the reason or whether they wanted to just increase loving relationship between the two, it's not exactly clear. There seem to be different reasons given for it. So now, so that's one Barishona originally. Then they say, here's another, and what they're talking about is all these customs that used to exist in Yehuda, and we're going to see from them, Abaye's point is that not everybody did yichud before the wedding. Because remember, once you do yichud before the wedding, you can no longer claim Ta'anat Betulim. The next two cases are clearly based on that in Yehuda, they did claim Ta'anat Betulim. Okay, so Yehuda Barishona Yumamidim Lahem Shnei Shushbenim. They would put two ushers, Echad Lo ve'Echad La. They each had an usher. Okay, listen to this. Okay, if you think about when you go to the airport, right, and they do a search and they, touch your body to kind of figure out that you're not hiding anything. So listen to this. They would basically do a body search before they went into the chuppah. Okay? They wouldn't do this in the Gamliel. Okay, now first of all, what are they saying? They didn't trust the people in Yehuda. There were a lot of cheaters. In the Gamliel, we don't need this. But in Yehuda, they would make sure that she's not bringing a sheet with her that has blood stains on it, that she's going to pull out later and say, oh, look, this is, proof of my betulim. Or that he's hiding something up his sleeve as well. They weren't sure, and they gave them these two ushers to check them, body search, before they went into the chuppah. Yehuda, third custom, they would sleep in the same house. And what would they do? It seems like They would go into the room immediately after to check before anyone has a chance to pull out a sheet that was a fake, and say, oh, here's the sheet. This was a betulim, and hide the other one. Or, they make sure they check. If you can imagine, right? Someone coming into your room at the end. Are you done? Okay, let's check what's going on. A little bit strange, but clearly there were cheaters there. Now, what do you see here? What you see here is that there was ta'anat betulim because these were instituted to prevent someone from lying when they claimed there was no blood or there was, whatever it was. So now you see here that in Yehuda, there were different customs. Okay, not everybody in Yehuda did that, and this Tosefta is brought to prove it. Anyone who didn't do like this, can't claim betulim. That line is a little bit strange, so we're going to have to figure out what this is. Ahaya. To what is this line referring? This last line. If you want to say it's the beginning, that they would be miyached, right? Chatan v'kala. And now what should it say? If you did like this, then you would be able to claim betulim, right? So kol nahag mebayla, it should say, if you did this custom, you wouldn't be able to. But what does it say? Kol lo nahag. If you didn't do like this, then you couldn't claim betulim. What do you mean? If you weren't miyached, you could claim betulim. So that doesn't make sense. Ela aseifa. Well, if you want to say it's on the second part, then it shouldn't say kol shelo nahag. What should it have said? Right? What's the seifa? They're talking about the second case, that they would do this body search. So what they say? Ela seifa kol shelo mushmash mebayla. Anyone who didn't do this body search, it should have said. Not kol shelo nahag. Anyone who wasn't checked, basically, it should have said. Amar Abaye. So it doesn't make sense in either place. So Abaye's first, it's the first answer. Lo olam areisha. Utznei kol shenahag. Change the language. The braita should say, the Tosefta should say again, anyone who did. Okay? Unahag. Amalei Rava. V'hal kol shelo nahag katani. But you're changing the wording entirely. You're doing a total switch. How could you say kol shenahag, lo nahag means kol shenahag? It's the opposite. It doesn't make sense. Ela amara v'haki kama. Kol shelo nahag minhag Galil b'Galil ela minhag Yehuda b'Galil eno yachol liton tanat betulim. Anyone who didn't do the custom of the Gamliel and the Galil, and yet did the custom of Yehuda and the Galil, eno yachol liton tanat betulim. And that makes it a very interesting statement, because what it's saying is, again, imagining that the rabbis are in the Galil when they're writing this. What are they saying? If you think that when you live in the Galil, you could do the minhag of Yehuda, well, you're messing yourself up, because in the end, you won't be able to claim tanat betulim. So better not to do the custom of the Yehuda, because you're going to basically prevent yourself from being able to have a claim of betulim once you're married. Rav Ashi amar la'olam ha'seifa. Third answer, it's really referring to the last line, utznei, and change it to kol shelo mushmash instead of kol shelo nahag, kol shelo mushmash, and that actually makes a lot more sense. That's actually a pretty good answer, because it really isn't the biggest difference whether you say kol shelo nahag, kol shelo mushmash. Anyone who wasn't checked can't come and claim again, because these people were suspected of being liars and cheaters. Okay. Before we move on, I want to kind of take one point that I took out of reading Safrai, which is that what he claims, and he quotes some sources that show a third custom, is that these different customs, right, we look at this and the Gemara looks at it and says, Ma pitom, how can you do this, right? What's our birchot erusin? Asher asar lanu et arusot, right? The women who are betrothed are forbidden to the husband. So how could they possibly have had yichud together and presumably slept together, right? It's totally forbidden. So what he claims is that it's very possible that the halacha that we know to be, that's mentioned in the Gemara and even the Nusach of the Birchot Erusin, wasn't agreed upon everybody, okay? Well, our Torah that we have is really more the Galilean Torah, because our Mishnah is put together from the Galilee, right, for the people in the Galilee, and therefore that's what was passed down. But what he claims from these earlier sources that talk about this custom in Yehuda, and he also points out this custom in Alexandria, in Egypt, that there were 3 different customs, and they were based on different halachic viewpoints about how they view erusin. So starting with Alexandria, he says that based on certain sources you can see, they didn't view erusin as marriage. We always talk about erusin is betrothal. It's halachic marriage to a certain extent, not marriage, but betrothal to the extent that you need a get, right? You need a get. You're basically already married enough to require a divorce. So that's one extreme. In Alexandria, he claims that they didn't view erusin as that. They viewed erusin like we view erusin. Okay, we're making a commitment to each other, but we don't need a divorce from it. And that they have one custom, which is they didn't view erusin at all as anything. Then we have the Galileans who viewed it as a betrothal, but it forbids, right? It's not enough yet. It's a partial betrothal that you're betrothed, but you can't yet be together with your husband. And what he claims is, again, it's his theory that, and he brings supports for it, and you can see them inside, but he claims that in Yehuda, they believed that erusin actually did permit you, okay, that you were actually permitted to be together. It wasn't forbidden. Erusin was more than what it was in the Galilee. And therefore, because of that perspective, so they had no problem having them be mityached together, right? Their version of Brechad Erusin would not have looked like our version. It wouldn't say Asar Lanu et Havusa. So it's not that they were doing something that was forbidden. It was just that they had a different approach to how we view Erusin, right? Think about it. If Erusin requires divorce, then you're obviously somewhat married, right? What we call married. So the question is just how much, right? And then what's the difference is a good question. And what's the difference between marriage and betrothal according to that? So it does have some questions against it, but it does explain it a little bit better. But again, the ones in the Gamliel, you can see we're disparaging to them and couldn't understand it. And kind of, even this whole thing that they had shushbanim, the question is that absolute truth? Or are they saying, well, these people, were bad because they did this and they were Ramaim and they weren't believed and all that. And it's almost a way of them pushing aside the people in Yehuda and putting them down because they wanted people not to take seriously what they did and do it by them because their halachic viewpoint was very different. They viewed erusin as marriage and as a just betrothal and forbidden to, and if you let them sleep together, wow, that's really bad. So, and then you have these sources that kind of push them to the side and say, oh, well, don't be like them. It's interesting, right? And the question is also, was it a very early custom, right? This seems to say it was a very early custom and it wasn't even any more in practice. And then also, it's not exactly clear what the practice was because you have people discussing it who are no longer living in that time. So anyway, there's a lot of interesting things there. Like I said, it's a very long article and worth reading, and Shuli's also gives some other insights. Okay, new Mishnah. Echat almanat Israel ve'echat almanat kohanim. Another strange custom. Okay, whether you're an almanah of Israel or of a Yisrael, or you're an almanah. Okay, it's unclear when they say kohanim here. Does it mean you're a widow from a kohen, or more likely you're a widow who is a bat kohen? You come from a kohen's family. Ketubata maneh. Okay, no matter what, you're going to get a ketuba of a maneh. It doesn't matter your status. But Beit Din shel kohanim hayugovin lebetula 400 zuz. This is a very interesting thing, and it's clearly not 100% clear where this applied, to who it applied. We'll see in the Gemara different options, really. But there was a Beit Din of kohanim. Safrai claims this is a Beit Din of tzdukim. Right? We saw the Sadducees that they had their own court system, and they come up a bunch, the Beit Din shel kohanim in the Mishnah. It's not exactly clear what this Beit Din shel kohanim is, but they basically ruled for the kohanim. So now it seems like, although it could be even more, we'll see in the Gemara, but they're talking about a bat kohen, because she has a certain status in society, she would get double the ketuba. She would be promised 400 zuz in her ketuba. The courts would insist. The rabbis didn't go against them. It's interesting because if they are tzdukim, like Safrai claims, right, often the rabbis went out against the tzdukim because the rabbis were often prushim, Pharisees. So it's interesting here to see on this issue, they didn't make an issue about it. Tana. Now, braita says, almanat kohanim ketubata matayim. Says the almana of a kohen gets matayim. But our Mishnah says, echad almana Yisrael, echad almana kohanim ketubata maneh. She only gets 100. So, why is this? How do you resolve this contradiction? Amar Rav Ashi, again bringing history into the picture. Shtei takanot hayu. There were different stages to what happened. Meika and the braita and the Mishnah each reflect different stages. In the beginning, they said Betula gets 400. If you're assuming we're talking about a bat kohen, again, it's not 100% clear. But if you're a daughter of a kohen, you get 400 zuz. Ula almana maneh, but a widow gets 100 like any widow. We don't distinguish. What was the problem? Turning now to Amud Bet. But then we saw that people started treating the almanot of kohanim, the bat kohen almanah, not very seriously, right? They were like, oh, well, she's an almanah. We're not interested in marrying her, right? She's no different than any almanah, so why would we marry her over anyone else? And tekinu lehu matayim. So because of that, they started giving her a ketuba of 200 zuz. you can see here that what clearly is going on is these are status issues in society. Okay, as much as we like to believe, right, everyone should be treated equally in those days, right? Just like we have issues with this issue of a virgin is in a higher place in society than a non-virgin, right? In terms of her marriageability, right? And which doesn't sit well with us, but it was definitely a prevalent custom in those days, not just among Jews, but among many of the other nations. That was just kind of the, this is what makes a better bride as a virgin. Then also, right, kohanim, the Kohen family, just like in those days, right? Nowadays, it's much harder to be what we're supposed to respect kohanim more than we respect any other person, right? It's a strange concept for us to get around. But in those days, yes, that's the way it was. Society was, this is the higher echelon of society. And if their widows were treated the same as everyone else, that wasn't a good thing. So therefore, it's kinulu matayim. So they gave them 200, so they would be treated nicer. They get more money. But what's the problem? Well, if you're going to marry a woman who's already been married, and you have your choice, a bat kohen, you have to pay 200 for a ketuba, and a regular woman who you only have to pay 100, you're going to choose, right? They're going to say, people stop marrying them. If I'm going to marry an almanah and have to pay 200 zuz, well, I may as well what? I may as well marry a virgin who's not a bat kohen, but at least she's a virgin, right? In other words, so yes, benot kohen are higher up, but when it comes to a virgin is higher up than that. So basically, we're going to end up, right? The men ended up saying, well, if I'm already going to spend 200 on a ketuba, I may as well get a virgin for that price. Again, this is comparing it, which we're going to see later, more comparisons of this to a purchase, right? Even though it's not a purchase, but the Gemara does speak about it in the language of a purchase, okay? So may as well for that price, better off getting a virgin. And therefore, Hadrinu l'miltai, they put her back down to 100 zuz, right? You would have thought they would do 150, right? Let's do something in the middle. But I guess it was there, they had the 200, the 100. They didn't start getting creative enough to say, let's give her 150. But basically, they said, for her own sake, to protect her, so that she's able to get remarried, they put it down to 100. Beit Din shel kohanim. So now we're going to this concept of this Beit Din shel kohanim, the institute of 400 zuz for the benot kohen. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Lo Beit Din shel kohanim bilvad amru. By the way, this wasn't just kohanim, and if you didn't believe me that this is a status issue, here it becomes very clear. Ela afilu mishpachot hamiyuchasot b'Yisrael, right? The ones who have the best yichus, right? The ones who can trace their lineage back as far as possible, and the ones who have no issues of any mamzerim in their family, any slaves in their family, anything. Ones who have the best yichus, imratzu la'asot kederach shakohanim osim. It's also, number one, an issue of showing this is all a status issue. And number two, I think it was a way of the Miyuchasim saying, we're just as good as the Kohanim. And we're going to give our daughters, right, insist that they get a higher ketuba as well, right? This is all using money as a status symbol. So now they say, wait a minute, Meitive, question on Shmuel. The braita says, if you want to do like the kohanim, kigon, like for example, a bat Yisrael le kohen, or a bat kohen le Yisrael. Okay, now some people think, by the way, that this 400 zuz was instituted for a kohen with a bat Yisrael, but that's like the best marriage ever. And that it was a way. Safrai talks about this, quotes an opinion in the Yerushalmi. It was a way of keeping out. Okay, talk about apropos Parshat Shavua with Benot Tzlafchad, okay, either last week or this week, depending on where you are. But Benot Tzlafchad, right, where they said you have to marry within your shevet, right? If you want to get the land, but you have to stay within the tribe. That this is a way of making sure that Kohanim married Kohanim, because they made the ketuba so high that nobody would want to marry a bat Kohen. Okay, that's also another way of looking at it. It's a different perspective. Instead of saying, right, it's a way to keep Kohanim marrying Kohanim. Okay, how they had the money to afford it is a good question. But it was a way of kind of discouraging other people from marrying his benot kohen. So now they say, so in this source, we kind of support that, because what are the kohanim? Kohanim or kohanim with kohanim? Now, if you want to be like a bat Yisrael a kohen or a bat kohen Yisrael, if it's a mixed marriage and you want to do this 400 zuz, you can. So what do you see from here? Who can do it? A Yisrael who marries a daughter of a kohen, or a kohen who marries a daughter of a Yisrael. But what is it mentioned here? Yisrael and Yisrael. How could Shmuel say, if you're a mishpacha miyucheset and you want to marry for 400 zuz, you can do it? It says here, right, Ba Yisrael the Kohen, Ba Kohen Yisrael Hudi Katzad Kuhuna. It's only if you have some element of kehuna. Bat Yisrael lo. But a bat Yisrael to Israel can't do this. Now, it seems strange. What, you can't just add money to your ketuba, right? It's a good question what they mean. I see someone was writing in the chat about Tosefet ketuba. So Tosefet ketuba, I think, is something else. And I think that this is the main sum of the ketuba you want to put as the 400 zuz. You can always add more, but that's added. That's something different. That's not the main sum. So I think what they're saying here is you can't make the main sum 400. You could do 200 zuz and then add 200 zuz. That's fine. But it's not like saying she's a ketuba 400. Right? That's different. Again, it's hard to understand exactly without really understanding the significance of what that number, why that was. Okay. So now they say, it sounds like it doesn't include Yisrael and Yisrael. So how did they allow it? So they say, oh no, you misunderstood this source. It's a lo mibaya kama. It's the structure of a lo mibaya, which means what? Lo mibaya ba Yisrael Yisrael de lo matzei armalei luya kama linamach. We didn't even need to mention Yisrael to Israel. Of course, now we go back to saying not what I just said a minute ago, and this actually makes more sense. Of course, you could give a ketuba 400. Anyone can give a ketuba 400. And so that case doesn't even need to be mentioned because he can't claim. Now, you won't understand this so well now. You'll understand it when we get to the next line, when we say what you can do in a different case. You can't claim, lo matzei amar, you can't say to her, iluya kama alina la, I'm raising you up in society, and therefore I don't need to give you a higher ketuba. He can't say that to her because he's in the same status as she is. They're both Yisraeli. Aval bat Yisrael a kohen. But the daughter of a Yisrael marrying a kohen, the kohen could say to her, I don't need to give you the 400 zuz because what? Dematzei armalai could say to her, iluya kama alina la. I'm already raising you up because I'm allowing you to marry me and I'm a kohen, right? This is a very arrogant kind of thing to say. But I'm already bringing you up to the status of marrying a kohen, and therefore you can't try to tell me I have to give you a high ketuba. Like, be happy that I'm already giving you status. I don't need to also promise you 400 zuz, right? Emalo kamash malan. Here you learn that the court could insist he give her 400 zuz, okay? Even though he's already doing her something good by marrying her, they could even insist that he give her the 400 zuz as well because he's a kohen, and kohanim are supposed to give more money. Again, it's not 100% clear from this whole thing why they're giving them more money, how this custom developed, what the purpose is. There's a lot of confusion about it. So if you're leaving confused, it's because it's not exactly clear. Was it disincentive so that someone wouldn't marry in from somewhere else? Is it to show higher status, right? So either, and then it becomes confusing. I understand if Bat Kohen who marries Yisrael should get a higher ketuba because she's coming from a place of status. But why Bat Yisrael marrying a Kohen, why should he have to pay all that money? Right? Or either it's just saying if he wanted to, he could, right? It's unclear exactly how this all works. Okay, new Mishnah. Here we get into the interesting Dine Mamado issues and believability, right? When we believe a person in court, what tools do we have to pull out of our arsenal in order to determine whose claim we're going to accept when we have contradictory claims? We're going to have a lot of this going forward for the next number of dapim. He marries a woman, not a virgin. She claims, look, when you promised me the 200 zuz when we got engaged, I was a virgin. But what happened? Well, I got raped. Once I was already betrothed to you, which means right? Your field just got ruined, okay? It's like you buy a field, and the next day a storm comes and destroys your field. So that's what happened to you, and it's your issue, right? There's nothing we can do about it. He says, no, what are you talking about? Maybe this happened, right? He doesn't know, okay? And that's going to be an important point because he doesn't know. This could have happened before we were betrothed. And then I'm going to claim mekach ta'ut. This was a mistake. And I'm not going to give you your ketuba of my time. I'm going to give you 100. So Rabban, Gamliel, and Rabbi Eliezer, they believe her. Rabbi Yehoshua, lo mipia anu chayim. We don't live off her word. Ela harezo b'chezkat be'ula, where she's considered a be'ula. Ad shelo titares, we're going to assume she was already not a virgin before the engagement. Vihitato, and she tricked him into believing she was. Ad shtavi raya l'dvareh, until she can bring a proof. What's this based on? So we're going to see inside the Gemara, but the first claim, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, why do they believe her? Because they say, or at least we'll see, at least the beginning of it is, She has a definitive claim. He has a suffix claim. He doesn't know. She says, I was raped once I was betrothed. She can claim that because that's her body, right? He has no idea what happened. He claims, well, maybe it was before. So this is what we call bari v'shema, when you have a clear claim, a bari claim, or a shema claim, a possible claim. Bari v'shema, bari adif. Bari always wins out. The definitive claim wins out. Not necessarily always, we'll see, but that's a possibility. Then Rabbi Yehoshua says, until she brings proof, what is this based on? Well, she wants to claim that I get 200 zuz. Where's the money? It's in his hands. So what do we learn always? If you want to take money out of someone else, she wants to claim the 200 zuz is hers, she has to prove it. She doesn't have proof. Unless she can bring proof, then she doesn't get her money, right? The money always stays in the hands. We keep the status quo. So that's his claim. So now the Gemara brings, in order to start comparing and figuring out who holds what and based on what, they bring another case, which is a monetary case. Itmar. Manali biyadcha. Okay, you say I have money, you have money of mine. Okay, you say to me, so like you gave me money, let's say you loan me money and I owe you the money. I say, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. So that's a bari v'shema. Your claim is definitive. I gave you money and you didn't give it back. And I say, I don't know. Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Huna Amarei Chaya. They say I have to pay back because again, bari v'shema, bari adif. Rav Nachman, Rabbi Yochanan Amarei Patur. Why? Because the money is in my hands. Here you see the same kind of machlok. Rav Huna, Rabbi Yehuda Amarei Chaya, bari v'shema, bari adif. Definitive claim versus possible, right? Unknown claim. The definitive wins out. Rav Nachman, Rabbi Yochanan Amarei Patur. Okay, Mama Rav Chazkat Mari. We leave the money in the hands of who it's in. It's in my hands. I get to keep it until you can prove otherwise. Amalei Abai Rav Yosef. Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda to Shmuel. They say that Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna are holding like Shmuel. How do we know? Ditnan. And they're going to bring Shmuel, who holds like Rabban Gamliel, and they're going to compare it and say, Shmuel holds like Rabban Gamliel, who basically believes the woman with her bari claim, with her definitive claim. Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda believe the bari claim must be holding that. And then we're going to end with, maybe we can distinguish between the cases. But first they bring Rabban Gamliel somewhere else. Okay, a later Mishnah in our section. Ditna. Haitama uberet. Okay, the background you need to know, we learned this in Yevamot. A woman who has relations with a person, there's certain people she can have relations with who disqualify her from marrying a Kohen. She can't marry a Kohen if you have sexual relations with a mamzer, a netin, a halal, a whole bunch of people. Okay, so right, remember haba'ala, this apostles her le'edu. We had a whole thing about it in Yevamot. In any case, that's the basis for this. A woman shows up. She shows up pregnant. We don't know who the father is. They said, who's the father? She says it was from this guy and he's a Kohen, which doesn't necessarily mean he's a Kohen. It means he's kasher. Okay, he doesn't mess me up for marrying a Kohen. He was a Yisrael, a Levi, a Kohen. Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, they believe her. And Rabbi Yehoshua doesn't. Same like our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel halachic Rabban Gamliel. Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, holds like Rabban Gamliel. Amar le Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda le Rabbi Yehuda. Shinana, you very smart child. It says to Rabbi Yehuda, Amar la Mishmei de Shmuel halachic Rabban Gamliel af berishona. They say in the name of Shmuel the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel, even in the first one. What's the first one? Well, we're going to have a whole set of Mishnayot, starting with ours, of these machlokot between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Gamliel against Rabbi Yehoshua. So he says, they say in the name of Shmuel, even in the first case, which is our case, meaning that Shmuel hold, right, my aperishona, to af agavdi, right, what does it mean even in our case? Because in our case, it's a little bit different. There's no money issue. But in our case, af agavdi ika lememer, okay, mamon of cheskat mare, even though there's this chazaka that the money is in the hands of the husband, still, Amar Rabban Gamliel, bari ad, he rules by bari. Her definitive claim is stronger. So what do you see here? That Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehoshua, Rav Huna and Rabbi Yehuda, that they basically hold like Shmuel. That's how we start. To which they say, right, so Lema, Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Huna, da Amrei Rabban Gamliel, Rav Nachman, Rabbi Yochanan, da Amrei Rabbi Yehoshua. We should line them up. It sounds like they're saying the same thing. We're going to end with Amar Lecha Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman could say, not here to say it, but he could say, Ana da Amrei afilu Rabban Gamliel. In other words, the Manali B'Yadcha case is not the same as our case. He there said that we keep the money in the hands of, right, I claimed, I don't know. I get to keep the money because the money's in my hands. You can't prove it until you prove it. Why? He holds there that we keep the money in the hands and we don't move hands. But he might hold, in our case, even like Rabban Gamliel. Why? There's a migo claim. Why is there a migo claim? So 2 reasons. She claims I was raped, right? Now, first of all, what woman would come forward and say I was raped if she could have claimed I was a mukat eitz, right? I'm not a betula because I got injured, right? That was a much better claim. First of all, who want to get up in front of everybody and say I was raped, right? That's number one. And number two, right, if she claims I was a mukat eitz after the wedding, after the engagement, I mean, then she would get a ketuba of 200 zuz. So that's like her best claim, basically. And here she says I was raped, which first of all, disqualifies her to marry a Kohen if she claims she was raped. So like, it's just not a good thing to say if you don't have to say it. So therefore, it's not just that there's bari b'shema bari adif, you also have a migo. So when you have 2 things helping you, in that case, even Rav Nachman will agree. In the manali b'yadcha case, there's only one thing. There's a bari b'shema bari ad, right? Bari b'shema, but that's it. You don't have anything to add to the bari b'shema. That's not enough. Just because I'm definitive and you're safek doesn't mean that my claim is right and yours is wrong. I still could be lying. Inami's second option is adkan loka, about not comparing these 2 cases. Adkan loka amar Rabban Gamliel hatam elida amrina okeh chazaka. She's got a chezkat betula. Until we know she's been with someone, a woman is born, until she gets married, we assume she's still a virgin. So she has a chezkat betula. She has a chazaka. That means what her presumptive status is. So it's not just a bari v'shema bari adif, there's also presumptive status. That doesn't exist here. But when you claim I gave you money and I say, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't have any chazaka. Yes, the money's in my hands, but that's not the same kind of chazaka that we assume presumptive status of anything. So basically, those are 2 reasons not to necessarily compare these 2 cases. Okay, but what you see here is that maybe bari v'shema only works when it works together with chazaka. Or according to the first one, only when it works together with amigo. Okay, and then it wouldn't necessarily be strong enough on its own. So if that's it for today, it's our first kind of entry into all this world of sveikot and how we deal with it. So anyway, we'll figure this out as we go on. Have a great day, everyone.